So, picture this. It's 1989. The Soviet Union is teetering towards collapse, but the Iron Curtain still weighs heavily upon the East. In its hubris, the Soviet regime commissions the construction of a secret super sub. We're not talking about a big sandwich here. The S-1 Utopia is a massive nuclear-powered vessel that aims to prove Russia's technological superiority over the capitalist pigs of the West. As a lowly comrade, you find yourself suddenly uplifted from your life of farming frozen potatoes and wrestling bears for vodka rations in the Siberian countryside. And now you have the good fortune of being promoted into the ranks of the submarine crew during its maiden voyage.
After a long night of partying with Sherlock Holmes, you bonk your head and wake up in the engine room. But something is wrong. Your coworker is visibly concerned about the floor-wide lockdown, and shift change is hours overdue. Flesh-eating creatures lurk in the shadows. Half the crew is gripped by madness, the other half is getting dagoned, and the commander is making plans to self-destruct the ship along with everyone inside. There's only one way forward. Heft your sturdy pipe wrench, hum the national anthem, and head off into the darkened halls in search of answers. Because you see, comrade, submarines haunted.
As always, if you want to join our ever-growing band of champions at the Heroes table, we'll talk about some ways you can support us at the end of the video. But for now, let's head deep beneath the waves and take a look at how Sonar Shock is doing its part to save the immersive sim. My name is Boss Sauce.
And I'm Rolling Coons. And together, we are the two-headed hero. Sonar Shock is the debut title from solo developer and Austrian journalist Raphael Bosniak. If you squint your eyes a little, you might think this was some sort of lost sequel to the 1994 Looking Glass classic System Shock. It's easy to spot the surface-level similarities, like the crunchy rendered enemies, cyberpunk interface, and mouse-driven control scheme. But once you dive below, you'll find a smartly crafted survival horror RPG lurking in the depths of its clanky mechanical guts.
This is a game that pushes the immersive sim design tenets of the late 90s through some tight 90-degree turns. As you search for a way out of this underwater coffin, your Soviet sailor will crawl through 4 sprawling, interconnected levels. You'll face down crazed crewmen, Lovecraftian horrors, and terrifying monsters pulled straight from the pages of Slavic folklore, and explode them into buckets of glorious, pixelated gore. You'll stumble into secret doors and perilous traps, point and click your way through plenty of cheeky and breaky conversations with the surviving comrades, set things on fire with your mind, and most importantly of all, eat burger. All the while you'll be ankle deep in the thick, crunchy layers of DOS nostalgia that Sonar Shock sprays across your display.
By this point, you've probably noticed the cursor floating around all over the screen, and you might be wondering exactly how this game controls. Let's get this out of the way. Sonar Shock doesn't have the extensive amount of body control featured in its obvious inspiration. It plays more like an old-school survival horror game with the WASD layout turning and moving your character. Yeah, tank controls. Because you see, comrade, glorious Russian sailors can only march forward towards victory, not sidestep hardship like lazy capitalist dogs.
The mouse cursor is used to interact with everything else, and aim your guns, sort of like an arcade light gun shooter. And that's basically it for the controls. There's no fancy moves, no corner peeks, no strafing, no looking up and down, no jump. You can crawl around in vents though. Lots of ancient DOS games used similar key mapping. It was pretty commonplace to have wacky, keyboard-spanning control schemes for first-person games, way back in the days before mouse look and twin-stick controllers finally became the standard.
The old-school controls are a very deliberate choice here, and they actually work really well to build the tension along with the spooky time overtones. A real sense of panic rises in your guts as you fumble around to slap in a magazine and pull back the slide on your crappy World War II surplus pistol before the game's hungry flesh monsters can bear down on you. Still, it's easy to see how this stuff could be a turnoff for players that weren't expecting this level of mechanical dedication to retro vibes. Just be prepared going in. It's an expectations issue.
not a skill issue, this is an expectations issue. Sonar Shock has a pretty big arsenal, and using it to blast the game's nightmarish beasts into borscht is pretty satisfying. Landing a critical hit fills the air with bloody pixels in glorious slow motion, but there's a 2-weapon limit, 1 hand weapon and 1 long gun. You see, comrade, one must leave room on their backs to hoist up the glory of the party. I can't fully get behind a 2-weapon limit. This ain't no Halo, give me some toys. But still, there's plenty of armaments that can be found hidden away in the submarine's various nooks and crannies, or traded for vodka bottles, so I rarely found myself defenseless. On the downside, there's very few ways to clear a crowd. A hand grenade or a Molotov cocktail would have been really welcome here.
In defense of a 2-weapon limit, you got 2 hands. You got 1 weapon in one hand, you got the other weapon in the other hand. I think it is like a borderline diegetic design choice. The guns are mostly based on real-world equivalents, and special care was taken to make sure that they handle differently. Each has its own advantages and faults, and most even have an alternate fire mode. The hunting rifle has a scope, but pulling back that tiny bolt gets pretty sweaty in a fight.
Oh please, oh please, oh please, oh please, oh please!
And even though you gotta reload it 1 shell at a time, there's no denying the stopping power of the old reliable double barrel.
But this is a survival horror game at its core. Scavenging the meager resources found aboard the Utopia is central to your survival. Bullets are scattered around only in small handfuls, health packs are rare treasures, and ammo starvation becomes a real challenge for the unprepared. Doubly so once you realize that new and deadlier monsters will appear in familiar old areas as the plot unfolds.
If guns feel too conventional, you can turn to the powers of the mind, ranging from simple stuff like starting fires to the truly bizarre, like creating deadly meat landmines. Powers are fueled by your sanity level. When sanity hits a critical level, your sailor will start to hallucinate, weapons will jam, tougher monsters will appear. Sometimes the game will even shatter the 4th wall with some truly goofy results.
Health and sanity is represented by this cute little spinning brain and this in-process Dr. Manhattan over here on the right. The rest of your interface is relegated to these tabs on the left over here. These cycle through the fun stuff like your current weapon, mission log, inventory, character sheet, and later on,
psychic powers!
These toys and skills are all gated by the game's rudimentary RPG system. It works exactly how you'd think. Get enough XP, level up, unlock the ability to move faster, hit harder, use new boomsticks or brain techniques. At the game's opening, you get to choose from a few special perks and talents, allowing you to start building your very own pistol-packing hacker or psychic cannibal or whatever, depending on your playstyle.
Sonar Shock goes a long way in making it feel like your character choices really matter. Building strength lets you one-shot an abomination with a well-placed crate toss.
Because in Soviet Russia, crate opens you!
Sinking points into hacking, on the other hand, can open the way to new shortcuts and secret arsenals. Plus, who could possibly complain about using this adorable knockoff Game Boy to open locks over a game of Bonk?
Hey, the Bonk song? Very good. All of these systems and features tie into Sonar Shock's Immersive feel. The levels are highly interactable and encourage a lot of poking around. There's plenty of notes to read, vents to crawl in, crates to break, Matryoshka dolls to unpack, even kitties to pet. Aww. And while a submarine might seem like a pretty small setting for a horror story, the Utopia is truly sprawling. There's a lot more environmental variety than you'd expect for a tube of metal and glass to have, and it's explained early on that this super sub was meant to be a monument to Soviet glory, even going so far as to have its own missile silos, gardens, and museums. The Utopia feels massive as a result, and uses these environments for some surreal moments and cool set pieces.
Characters are all 2D sprites. Monsters have this otherworldly, pre-rendered clay model look to them, while the humans fall more towards traditional pixel graphics. I really loved that so many of the designs incorporated nightmarish folktales with creatures of the depths. You'll find yourself cornered by an anglerfish monster one moment, then a freaky naked guy chases you through the halls in the next. And while some of the monsters, like these blubber creatures, are too cute to really feel like a threat, there were some moments where I experienced genuine chills.
The game sounds pretty good too. The soundtrack might be sparse, but it carries a good mix of 80s synth pop and patriotic anthems. These are primarily played on wobbly, weather-beaten phonographs to provide some extra atmosphere. Even though a lot of the sound effects are clearly stock, it's well curated. The screams and groans of the Lovecraftian monstrosities all go a long way to bring out the spookies, while some of the other sounds up the silly factor. The guy on fire sound effect was especially good.
Yeah, it's hard to get that Foley. You have to go through a whole box full of guys. Sonar Shock approaches its storytelling with a good amount of goofy charm, and it's accurate to say that the game aims to walk the lines between horror and comedy. There was clearly a temptation here to reduce the dialogue into a bunch of UC Comrade subreddit banter.
Good thing we're here to pluck that low-hanging fruit.
While this is true to a point, there's a few conversations that do a nice job poking fun at the blind nationalism of the era, as well as a couple goofy back and forths with the merchants and crewmen. When a game lays it out in the trailer that you're gonna eat burger and solve mysteries with Sherlock Holmes, you probably have a pretty good idea of the tone to expect.
Having some little pixelated buddies to chat with dilutes the spooky vibes a bit, especially when compared to the grim feeling of isolation that ran through the icy metal veins of Citadel Station. There's no crazy computer watching your every move, but there were still plenty of moments that puckered up the old chalky starfish, especially as your unlucky sailor starts to lose their grip on reality. Once again, the environmental design does so much heavy lifting here. Without giving away too much, the game explores the idea of a Soviet super sub serving as an icon of misplaced pride, going as far as ripping up and transplanting actual historical landmarks from all over the Union to sail around the continent on the S1 Utopia's maiden voyage. It's no surprise that some of these artifacts end up being super haunted, and it falls upon the surviving crew to restore control before everyone gets turned into Davy Jones's crewmen.
I'd be a squid guy. You know? To be a crab person.
To be a barnacle on the arse of a whale.
I think you'd get a lot of video game time in if you were a barnacle.
No thumbs, though. Guess it'd be only Kinect games,
Side quests often have you hunting down an object or taking out a particularly troublesome monster, but the main quest design is where the game's ImSim sensibilities shine through. Most of the story objectives are broad, and several have different paths to victory if you're clever enough to crack the right keypad or poke around in the right desk drawers, punch the right stack of newspapers. With a few clues and a little bit of clever detective work, like punching newspaper stacks, I found it was possible to access some secrets that bypass major chunks of the main plot. There's even an achievement for beating the game in 45 minutes. I'm sure the speedrunners out there would have a good time coming up with creative ways to shave that time down.
Sonar Shock is brimming with secrets, and even though the developer states that the game's playtime only adds up to 3 or 4 hours, the completionist will easily spend double that amount in a single run. There's more than one ending to chase, and plenty of side content that's easy to miss, depending on your character build and your skills. This is basically a long way of saying that there's way more game on offer here than the price tag might lead you to believe.
Sonar Shock is an admirable attempt to revive long dormant approaches to game design, and while it pulls off most of what it attempts, there's still a few sore points. Movement can feel a little sticky, especially while crouched, and it's possible to find yourself getting momentarily jammed up on vent covers or desks from time to time.
Another minor issue lies with the map. This little thing is the map. So tiny. I tried to find a way to embiggenate this to no avail. I ended up having to turn to the dark powers of video editing. But this is all you get. At least there's labels.
Map tiny? Labels good.
It works okay, but man, what I'd give for a zoom button here.
There's also a decent amount of typos and grammatical errors in the game. Given the game's single developer journey, this is understandable, but it might take you out of the experience from time to time.
You pumped your head. Wonder how that went down.
It takes a lot of practice to learn how to pump your own head.
The biggest issue has to be the single save slot.
I don't want to get deep into the classic debate as to whether it's good or bad for games to allow for a save scum. Either way, you won't be scumming it here. On most difficulty levels you can save at any time or place, but you need to collect and consume these little pink discs in order to do so.
Limited saves are another survival horror staple, but in most games they leave the player with the choice of saving as often as they want to a single slot, or saving to multiple slots while limiting the number of saves to a consumable, like the Resident Evil ink ribbons. Instead, Sonar Shock does both? So as a result, it's entirely possible to tank your whole playthrough if you save at a point when you're low on resources. My first run ended about 3/4 through the game, hopelessly caught in the grips of madness, with my body broken, my guns dry, and no way to safely backtrack for more resources.
That's realism, baby!
And while that seems like an appropriately spooky fate for my unlucky sailor, it was a little disappointing to have to start all over.
None of these minor issues are enough to stand in the way of our strong recommendation. Sonar Shock reaches back to a time when adventure games were taking their wobbly first steps into 3D and does a great job to stoke the engine fires of nostalgia along the way. The dev announced a massive director's cut update for the game that will add weapons, monsters, a new difficulty setting, and a new Game Plus mode, making this a crazy good value proposition at only $8 Amerikanski dollars. This is a Herculean effort for one single person. If you're an immersive sim fan that loves survival horror, RPGs, and goofy dialogue, and don't mind spending time with tank controls, this is a great way to spend a rainy evening or two.
Thanks for coming along with us on this journey through the murky depths. If you want to help us out, take a second to like and share the video and sub to our channel. If you want to know when our next video gurgles up from the deep, make sure to click on that notification bell. And tell us what your favorite comrade joke is down in the comments.
Subscribe. Submarine scribe. Or better yet, head yourself over to our Patreon page and warm your cockles by the cozy fireplace of the Heroes Tavern. Just 2 measly doubloons per month gets you early access to all of our videos, and higher tiers gain access to additional exclusive perks and bonuses!
The highest praise goes to our champion at the Seat of Honor level, Wolfgang Bristol.
And we raise our mugs to all those that take a seat at the heroes table, including
Jaduzable,
Keke,
Spinal Pine,
and Vulps. Or do you think it's Wulps?
I think it might be Vulpes, and the rest. It's a tough time out there in the dark morass of YouTube, and your comments and donations mean a lot to us. It truly gives us a reason to keep going. Thanks once more for sticking around, and we'll see you on the next Two-Headed Hero.